I can't give you.
This was like a thrill to be able to show her story here in Harlem. That was like a dream of mine a few years ago. When I was up here shooting several times on her block and at the Jungle and at the Armory, and I would talk to people and, what are you doing with a camera and whatnot? I said, oh, we're making a film about Althea Gibson. And so many people said, who's that? Who's that? Wow. So we're happy to be able to share this with y'all.
And I know you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, but for folks who might have missed it, can you tell them how you came to know the Althea Gibson story and how you fell in love with Althea? Because you seem to be in love.
Yeah, I love Althea. I feel like I have a relationship with Althea. I had to answer to her all the time when I might not have wanted to, go edit more. I was like, uh-oh, Althea is talking to me. But as I mentioned, I got connected because of a photograph. My mother was a tennis player. She's from Jamaica, and there was a photo of Althea and my mom who played a match in 1958 at the restricted Marion Cricket Club. And she would tell stories about that same match over and over. But what intrigued me most about Althea was really the story arc that she was born in the cotton fields to sharecropper parents, and then 30 years later got the trophy from the Queen of England at Wimbledon. Wow. And I just thought that was an amazing story arc. And then along the way, she had a ticker tape parade, became the first black woman to play pro golf, cut an album, sang on the Ed Sullivan Show, was in a John Wayne film, and got a college degree, which I think is really impressive. So I just got hooked on her story, and I thought she was a very modern woman. Like if she stepped off into the Harlem streets today, I think she would have no problem. Musically, we tried to encapsulate her whole life through the music by having the cotton field influence, Delta blues, the Harlem influence, jazz and gospel. She went back down and lived in the segregated South, and so we have freedom song influence there. But then also very intentionally we had hip hop in it for a couple reasons. One, we wanted to reach young people, and that was one way to maybe bring people into it through the music. But also, the musicians who worked on it, who watched part of the film, all agreed that she was like a hip hop kid in terms of her attitude. Take no prisoners, don't tell me what to do, and so we tried to fit that in musically as well.
Did you find in getting to the top of the tennis world that you had any real great obstacles because of your race?
No, I don't think that there are any obstacles as far as race is concerned.
She was a street kid. Althea came to tennis an aggressive female that had to learn how to survive.
It was very intimidating when she walked on the court. She basically scared the hell out of a lot of the girls.
Everyone could feel her presence. She'd walk in a room, you'd feel her.
It was the mecca of tennis, and it was something that was very alien to us.
Everything was white. The balls, the clothes, the people, the socks, the shoes, everything.
People had never seen a black player before, and they didn't know black people could play tennis.
I just want to play. Just let me be one of you. And unfortunately, in the 50s, it just wasn't that easy.
We jumped up. It was a frightening experience to see an axe through your door is a frightening thing.
She was pressured to be more outspoken, but she wanted to be a person who did it through her racket.
Black people had no use for her.
Then she had to quit. She had to stop playing tennis when she was clearly the best player in the world.
The tennis world definitely turned their back on her.
And she was neglected by everybody.
I can't hang around any longer, she said. Life really doesn't seem worth winning, so I'm just saying goodbye to all my friends.
She is a product of our city. She came up the hard way and now stands at the top of her class. She reached the top not only because of her natural athletic ability, but because of her unwavering courage and determination to be a champion.
Yeah, I would love for them to see it. They haven't seen it yet. They've been invited to some screenings. Actually, I was out at the Open today, and a friend of mine who's a working journalist there, he was at Serena's press conference, her first big press conference at the Open, and with 150 journalists in the room, he actually got to ask her a question, and he made reference to a quote she made that's in the Sunday Times Magazine coming up this Sunday. It's a great cover article about Serena, written by, I forget her name, but an amazing writer, black female poet. And Serena referenced Althea. And Serena's being very diplomatic these days because the whole world is watching her. So she's referencing Althea and Xena. Anyway, so my friend, the journalist, asked her, "Have you seen the new Althea documentary?" And she said, "No, I haven't, but I'm looking forward to it." So we tried to reach out to her a lot. I'm a big fan of Serena and Venus. Like, I'm a tennis guy, and I still coach tennis, and I'm just been watching her for 15, 16 years, and I'm amazed at what an amazing player she is. The only story that I heard was what Billie Jean King told me, that she and Venus once went to go visit her, and they spent a little time with her, and Billie told me that Venus and I, we called her, and she usually wouldn't pick up the phone. I'd call her every 6 months or whatever, and she would never pick up the phone. And Mayor Dinkins said the same thing. She would never pick up the phone and you get that answering machine. But she said this time she picked up, and she let me and Venus come over, and we went and looked at all her stuff in the basement, and it was great. So that's the only instance. And then, her whole relationship to the civil rights movement really intrigued me, and I had done some work on other projects that were about that subject. And the fact that she was on the front cover of New York Times, Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Sport Magazine. So of course people wanted her to speak out and represent. And as we hear in the film, that's not what she wanted to do. And I like to share this story that Jeannie Ash shared with me. She was comparing Althea's upbringing with Arthur's, and she said that Arthur played tennis to further his causes, to give himself a platform. He was much more interested in that, actually, than tennis. But when Arthur grew up, she said he was surrounded by the church in Richmond. He had a really strong church community that gave him strength and gave him a platform and gave him kind of like security to be able to speak out. Then he went to UCLA, and that gave him a lot of legitimacy and an even bigger sort of powerful, respected community. And then he was in the U.S. Army, a lieutenant in the Army, and all of these things gave him security and even safety. Plus, he's like 15 years later, 10, 15 years later than Althea. And as Jeannie pointed out, Althea was a single black woman with no financial standing and no real strong family and community really around her. Somewhat she had community with the doctors down south, but in 1955, when she went and represented the State Department had her represent the country on that tour overseas, that was right when Emmett Till happened, and Rosa Parks and lynchings left and right. So how could somebody like Althea go start making speeches and saying this has to happen, that has to happen? So people were disappointed in her, and that was all kind of new to me as I dug into it. She did the one album, and I still have not been able to find a real copy of it. I looked a lot, I check every few months, and then there's a little bit of her music in there, and so Angela has this tape. When I was down in Florida interviewing Angela, she has this tape that has 11 songs from Althea that was recorded in a London recording studio with a full band, that Angela, through her London Connects, hooked this session up, and it was supposed to lead to something, and it never really did. And so she let me record it just with my video camera next to her little cassette player, because it's on a cassette. And I was like, Angela, who owns this? Who owns the rights? She's like, I own it. It's the only copy. So we'd like to also do something with that. But you gotta get the lawyers involved with that because she's not singing her own songs. They're like standards, you know.
I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while. We're sure to find happiness, and I guess